our merciful and compassionate God. May the meditations of our hearts together and the words that I present today be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Happy Mother's Day. Now, when I say Happy Mother's Day, that is to include mothers, grandmothers, stepmothers, aunts, women who have no children but impact the lives of children, and those who are mothers through adoption. You are all included. Exodus 20:12, I'll remind you, says, "Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." Today we honor mothers. Dads, you'll have to wait until June. Now, as I proceed with the rest of the message, I do understand that not everyone had a mother that was supportive or could even be abusive. A mother that neglects or tears down a child's self-worth is not what this sermon is about. Instead, referring to our sabbatical theme of "They'll know we are Christians by our love," we need to talk about how people will know us for our love. Can you think of a person that has demonstrated great love? Well, Jesus comes to mind first. But of the people you have personally known, who taught you unconditional sacrificial love? I think for most of us, it would be your mom. And the 5th verse of Timothy, or 2 Timothy 1, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that you've lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. When I think back to my grandmothers, I remember going to church with them when we were visiting on a Sunday. That didn't happen very much as they lived in Illinois and we lived in Michigan. However, it did strike me, and I remember that Reverend Dr. Carlton Rogers would speak with my family when we visited Elgin. And Dr. McIlvaney would speak with my family when we visited Court Street Church in Rockford. There was a relationship with the church and with each grandparent. My mother was raising 4 children, and we never missed a Sunday service while I was growing up, whether we wanted to or not. Sunday school was a must, and that wasn't really hard, as I had friends in Sunday school throughout my school years. It was my mother who would read to us from the children's Bible. It was my mother that taught us to pray before each meal and before we went to bed at night. My mother was active in WSCS. Ladies, do any of you remember WSCS? I see a few nodding heads. Women's Society of Christian Service. I remember my mom hosting her circle at the house. Of course, later the group became known as the UMW. It was my mother that kept in touch with one of our missionaries in Japan, who actually came one Sunday to dinner at our house. But if it wasn't for my mother's faithfulness to the Methodist Church, I wouldn't be here. You see, she attended Northwestern University, and as a part of the women of First Methodist Church of Evanston, they hosted socials for the soldiers and sailors studying at Northwestern during the Second World War. My dad met her at one of those socials, and they were married after he graduated, just before shipping off to New York to learn bomb disposal. Thankfully, the war ended before he could put his training to use, and then spent his remaining time on ships bringing soldiers home. We moved about a bit, but between second and third grade, my family moved from East Grand Rapids, Michigan to Norton Township outside of Muskegon. It's now known as Norton Shores. We had been attending First Methodist Church of Grand Rapids, and every child going into third grade received a Bible from the church. Even though we were moving that summer, my mother made sure that I was still included on that list, and indeed, a Bible signed by our two pastors in Grand Rapids arrived at our home in 1964, and I still have it. Like many of you, my mother was there for every cough, cold, and usually more serious illnesses. German measles and chicken pox weren't much fun, but when almost the entire family came down with the mumps at Thanksgiving, Mom had to quickly revert to Plan B and take care of all of us. She predicted when I was young that I'd either be a politician or a minister. That was never shared with me until I answered the call to ministry. And I have to say, she was pretty happy to hear that I had heard my call and answered it. One other thing that I'll share with you is that the hymns that we are singing today, the first hymn was taught to the entire Sunday school of our church in the 1960s when I was about 7 years old. And we sang that a lot. So that's in memory as well. The final hymn that you will be singing was my mother's favorite. And it fits. So, how do we treat our mothers? Like most of you, there were times that I didn't do well, or was perhaps mischievous. When I was a younger teenager, I got really interested in radio. And I got a shortwave radio at one point, and Dad and I went down to Heathkit in Benton Harbor and picked up the kit, and we had to build it, but we got it done, and it really worked well, and the decision was made that I shouldn't have that in my room, that it should be on the hutch in the dining room. Well, that was fine with me. I didn't really care. I had it. And a friend of mine from down the street came and climbed the spruce trees in our backyard to hang an antenna that was probably close to 100 feet long, and he was about 65 feet up in the air. Now, these trees were pretty tall. But this copper wire ran from one side of the lot to the other side of the lot, and then into the window of the dining room to hook to the radio. To say my mother and father were a little bit concerned about lightning is an understatement. Even though Dad insisted there was a lightning arrestor on that wire before it came in the house, there was more than a little concern, mostly from my mother. Well, sometimes we don't treat Mom quite as well as we should, because my dad had a stereo demonstration record, and on it was this tremendous clap of thunder. So one day in the afternoon, Mom was working in the kitchen. Don't even remember what she was doing, but she was pretty well glued to the kitchen. Well, it was right off the dining room where my radio was. Well, at that point in time, I had one of those Polaroid cameras with a flash cube. I set the record going with the headphones in so she couldn't hear the record was playing. I got to the point where the clap of thunder would happen. I yanked out the headphone jack, cranked up the volume, and hit the button to flash the flash cube. Needless to say, she rapidly entered the dining room. Wait till your father gets home. Well, that's where I learned those kind of things from. So he thought it was pretty funny. So sometimes we don't treat mom quite as well as we should. However, and well, most times I was good to mom and she was very good to me. I was very blessed to anoint her with oil and have a healing prayer with family around the bed the last evening she was alive. We need to remember that none of us know the time or date that we will be called home. And we need to take the time to show our mothers the kind of love they need to have. John 19, verses 25 through 27. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her into his own home. Even from the cross, Jesus was concerned for his mother and her needs. What love he demonstrates. Today we honor our mothers, but what I wish for you to take away is the example of your mothers. When there were other big plans for the family and you got sick, who stayed with you? When you had had a bad day, who was there to listen or cheer you up? When mom could have been out with friends having fun but chose to stay home with her family, did you notice? How many times did our mothers sacrifice to make our lives better? How many times did your mom make your birthday a special event? Take away this from your mothers this day, the example of unconditional and sacrificial love. If you live this example, others will see, and they'll know we are Christians by our love. Amen.